You will come to work today, or I will have you fired, the manager screamed at Lissy over the phone. Sam, I have a fever, Lissy coughed. I can't even stand up properly. How am I going to come and work with a fever? She coughed again. Please understand, Sam. I have only taken a few days off since joining a year ago. The restaurant manager interrupted her. Hey, I don't care how many leaves you took. We are fully booked tonight, and you will be here. That's it, he told her condescendingly. Lissy was getting angrier and angrier at the arrogant man. Why don't you ask Greg to come? He is coming anyway. He is the head chef. I won't be needed if at least one chef is there. I know because I have done so many shifts alone by myself as the only chef, she told him in between coughs. He cannot come. He is not available today, the manager replied in short. He did not tell any of us that he will not be able to make it today. Did he tell you yesterday? Lissy asked him, getting angrier by the minute, still coughing. The manager stammered. He told me today, and he had a fair reason for not coming. Well, that's too bad. You will have to find a new chef for the day then. The manager lost it completely. You fricking bitch. You will come to work today, or I'll have you fired, stupido. Then he hung up. Lissy had worked for Macy's restaurant for a year as a chef. It was her first job as a chef. The Macy's was not her first choice of a place to work, but she had to start somewhere. At the time, Macy's was just a mediocre restaurant. Most of the time, she was the one who stepped up when the head chef, Greg, was absent, which has happened a lot since she joined as a chef. Greg figured out that Lissy was a competent chef and decided to take advantage of her. He would take credit for her work while taking more time away from work. He could do this perfectly since the restaurant manager and he were best buddies. This was one of those days Greg failed to show up to work, but unfortunately, Lissy was not well that day. She called the manager and told him she would not be able to come since she had a fever. The manager said she had to go since Greg would not be there. She asked if he could tell Greg to go since there was no way she could come to work with a fever and cough. The manager cursed at her and said it was fully booked for the evening and she would be fired if she did not come to work. Lissy was taken aback by the degrading way he spoke at her. It was disrespectful. Before she said another word, he hung up. Lissy was angry at him for the way he talked. She was also very hurt because it was primarily because of her hard work that they were fully booked. When Lissy first joined, it was just an average place with only a few older adults booking for dinner. After she came, she introduced several new plates that became very popular quickly. Greg envied her success, but since he was the head chef, he took most of the credit for the restaurant's turnaround. Greg and his buddy, the restaurant manager, ensured that the upper management did not find anything special about her skills. But all the restaurant staff knew it was entirely because of Lissy's skills as a chef that the restaurant finally started to thrive. Younger people who joined the team recently took her as an example of how to work in a restaurant. Lissy turned off her phone, deeply hurt by the manager's words. She turned her phone off and decided to take a good rest regardless of what happened to her job. She was barely able to go down to get a taxi. She somehow made it to her doctor, and upon examining her, the doctor gave her some medicine and advised her to stay at home for at least a couple of days until she fully recovered. After buying the prescribed drugs from the pharmacy, she took a taxi to her apartment and crawled back to bed. She was coughing, which made it very hard for her to fall asleep. The next day, she was a little better. The manager called her again but did not answer him, and instead sent him a message telling him she wouldn't be coming that day either. The manager called several times but did not answer because she did not want to put up with his childish tantrums. She was hurt by how he had talked to her the previous day. It took 2 days for her to get well enough to return to work. During her time at home, she thought of even quitting the job. But since she did nothing wrong, she decided to see what would happen if she returned to work. When she reported to work, she was stopped at the door by the manager. He told her that she was under review due to her absence. She was stunned to hear it. Although he said it, she did not think he would go that far. She knew the manager did not like her because she was talented and a woman. She was angry at how unjustly he was treating her. She told him the same. The manager then screamed at her loudly, degrading her in front of all the staff. Lissy felt helpless, and tears started to roll down her eyes. The manager enjoyed seeing her cry. He berated her even more. She could see Greg also enjoying her pain at the kitchen door. The manager and the head chef were best buddies. So maybe they were planning to send her home for good. She went back to the changing room. A couple of servers said that Greg and the manager were total jackasses and not to take what he said seriously. They liked Lissy, but they were unable to do anything. Then, after the waitress left, Elsa, a waitress who joined at the same restaurant time as Lissy did, came to Lissy. She asked Lissy not to worry and that everything would be fine. Lissy was surprised that usually silent Elsa talked to her and seemed very sure of what she said. She felt good a little because Elsa was a good person, although she did not speak with people much. If she believed it enough to tell it, Lissy, that might be true. After about 10 minutes, she was called to the review, and Greg was there also. Lissy's good hopes were short-lived as they started to accuse her of sabotaging the restaurant by being absent on a critical day. They said everything was better before Lissy joined the restaurant, which was unbelievable since Macy's was on a downward slope then. They did not listen to anything Lissy said. They did not let her even complete her sentences. They criticized her for half an hour before finally telling her she was allowed to go. She started to go back home sobbing. The rest of the staff watched helplessly. As she was trying to leave, another person came in. Everyone was surprised to see that it was the owner of the restaurant. The owner had not come to the restaurant more than a couple of times in the past 6 months. He was busy setting up a new branch of Macy's in another state. The owner saw Lissy leaving with a tear-soaked face. He asked Lissy to stop. Then he started to talk. He said that he had been looking at the past few days' events. There were a lot of customer complaints over those past few days. Sam, the manager, started blaming Lissy, telling them that she took leave without notifying her and more lies. The owner took out his phone and showed them a photo of the manager and Greg having a beer at the beach. The manager's and Greg's faces were completely white. The owner told them how the manager and Greg took advantage of the complex working nature of Lissy and the junior manager, giving them full responsibility while they took a lot of paid time off. The owner had been looking to the issues in the restaurant even before Lissy came, but got to know that it was Lissy's talents that brought back the customers. Then the owner apologized to Lissy for all the abuse she had to go through. He said he knew that Macy was getting successful because of her skills as a great cook. He also mentioned that apart from the manager and the head chef, the rest of the staff was doing an excellent job. When he said this, Sam's and Greg's face darkened. They started to talk and tried to argue with the owner. Without saying a single word, the owner raised his hand and motioned them to stop. After several feeble attempts to make him hear them, they stopped, defeated, without even a word. Then, in front of everyone, the restaurant owner fired the manager and Greg. At the same time, he promoted Lissy to the head chef and the young junior manager to the manager post. All the staff cheered for both of them since they knew they were more than capable of the job. The fired manager and Greg got up and left, their heads lowered. Lissy was delighted and incredibly proud that her hard work had finally paid off. She thanked the restaurant owner for supporting them and promised they would make Macy's the best restaurant in the state. The owner said that he believed it and that they had his full support. The staff congratulated the newly promoted duo with sincere joy. That day, the restaurant's customers felt the change in the restaurant. Everyone was doing their job happily. Lissy cooked the best food she put out with the support team. Within a couple of months, Macy started to draw so many customers that they had to maintain a long waiting list for customers who booked weeks ahead for their dinner. Soon, Lissy hired another talented chef to support her. Between them, they devised unique dishes daily that got top customer compliments. As promised, Lissy and the new manager made the restaurant one of the best in the area. They even had to expand to the next block because they did not have enough room to cater to all the customers. The owner had made the right decision by allowing the two young people. Lissy did not stop at Macy's. She later started her restaurant in another city by her name. Lissy soon began to thrive under her well-experienced guidance. As a postscript, there's something to add. One day, while interviewing chefs at her restaurant, guess who came to interview? It was none other than Lissy's old mate, Greg. He walked into the room, and when he recognized her, his face went white like he had seen a ghost. He said nothing to her, simply stood up and left. Lissy was as surprised to see him as he did after seeing her. Later, Lissy joked that she might have given him a chance if he had owned up to his mistakes and just talked to her. She had never forgotten, but she was always willing to forgive.
Andrew shrinks into his hoodie as he walks into the cafeteria. It is noisy. Students have scattered around, some sitting, some walking around, and everybody is either in one group or the other. Paired off, 4 to 6 clique, cheerleaders, football jocks, debate group. Andrew stands at the entrance of the cafeteria and looks around. He had just transferred a week ago to Carmen High, and in that week he had been teased, made fun of, and called every name in the book about having diabetes, and humiliated in front of his whole class, all by a group of mean jocks, Chris, Nick, and Mason. He had only been in Carmen High for a week and hated every minute of it. He scanned the cafeteria once more, looking for, and at the same time, hoping not to see who he was looking for. When he was satisfied that they weren't there, he took a step in. He had barely taken 5 steps in when he felt a hand on his shoulder. Before he turned to see who it was, Andrew knew who it was and had started shaking in his pants. "Well, well, look what we have here. Drew the Shrew. So you finally grew the balls to eat in the cafeteria like a normal person." Chris, the leader of the group, and the one Andrew hated the most, said. He laughed. Nick and Mason joined in as they took his arm on both sides and lifted him high, carrying him to the nearest table. Andrew didn't bother to struggle as they effortlessly moved him. He knew what was coming. He had lived through it once, and all he wanted was for it to be over. He closed his eyes and imagined he was at home. In his bedroom, it was his heaven, the only place he ever truly loved in the whole world. However, no matter how desperately he wished he could shut it all out, Chris's voice rang loud and clear as he announced to the cafeteria, "Hear ye, hear ye. Before you stand sugar overload, weak knees, diabetically perfect Drew the Shrew. Give it up for him, you all." A tear leaked through Andrew's tightly shut eyelids as all the students laughed. Andrew hears his dad call out to him as he runs blindly into his room. After the show Chris, Nick, and Mason had put on in the cafeteria played out, the principal, Mrs. Gooding, came into the restaurant and dispelled it. She gave Chris, Nick, and Mason a week of detention, and she had turned to Andrew and asked him if he thought he could still handle the rest of the day. When he didn't reply, she saw how he was shaking. She had called Andrew's dad to come and pick him up. It wasn't until later Andrew learned that a student had gone to report to the principal. Andrew silently said a prayer for that student. He slammed the door to his room, dumped his backpack on the floor, and fell face down on his bed, letting all the tears he had held back loose. He hears his dad knocking on the door, asking if he is okay and if he wants to talk. Andrew ignores everything and just sobs into his pillow. After a while, when he realizes Andrew is not going to answer, his dad finally leaves. 5 hours later, at 6:18 p.m., Andrew finally gets up from his bed. He had dozed off somewhere between crying his eyes out and hating his life. He sits in his bed and looks around. The sun spilled into his room through a crack in the window, illuminating the room. He picks up his glasses from his nightstand, puts them on, and walks outside. He sees his dad sitting at the dining table, his reading glasses perched on his face as he peered at his laptop. The light from the sun that shone through the dining area windows washed over his head, lightening the shades of his hair. Andrew stands at the entrance and stares at his dad for a few seconds. For as long as Andrew could remember, he had always wished he could be more like his father, have a quarter of his strength, a pinch of his courage, and not be this weakling. On the good days, he hated the world for being so cruel to him. He hated the people in the world for being so mean to him. And sometimes he even hated the universe for casting the type of cruel fate he had on him. And on the evil days, he hated himself. His dad must have heard his thoughts somehow because he looked over at him. He slowly removed his glasses, concern evident in his voice. He asked, "Hey, how are you feeling?" Andrew hesitates and then walks into the dining area. He sits in the chair adjacent to his dad's and pours water from the pitcher on the table into a glass cup. He feels his father's eyes on him as he drinks. His dad waits for him to finish drinking, and then he asks, "Okay now?" Even though he wasn't anything but, Andrew nods. His dad also nods and clears his throat. "You want to talk about it?" he asks. Maybe it was the fatigue from the day he had, or perhaps he was just tired of keeping it all in. But the automatic response he always had prepared didn't suffice at the moment, and he found himself laying it all out to his dad. He broke down and told him everything, from the humiliation to the embarrassments, the fundamental injustice, and everything he had been going through since he started going to Carmen. His dad listened while he talked, not once interrupting him, and when Andrew was finally done, his throat had gone scratchy, and the back of his eyes were itchy. The tears were threatening, but he did his best to keep them in check. He was not going to cry in front of his dad. He knew it was all right if he did, but he needed not to. When it looked like Andrew was finally done, his father said, "I want to tell you a story about a crow and an eagle. There was this eagle who got picked on by a crow, kind of like how you are getting picked on by these boys. The crow would fly above this eagle and peck on the eagle's eyes, kind of like how these boys act. They are above you and pick on your sickness. And the crow, after doing this, would fly far away where the eagle cannot reach her. Kind of like how these boys walk around feeling full of themselves after picking on you. But then the eagle does something. She flies straight and high, higher than the crow can reach. And because of this, the crow falls to her death, as she does not have the required oxygen to fly that high." At this point, his dad pauses and looks into Andrew's eyes. He holds eye contact with him as he adds, "And that, son, is what you must do. The eagle is what you must become. You must soar high, higher than those boys. You must fly, son, higher than those boys. So high they don't have enough oxygen to meet up. You must be the eagle, son." 20 years later, the rain pours down heavily. It had not let down since morning. It was 2 p.m. A black Chevy pulls up in front of a modern-style house. A man dressed in a black suit comes out of the car, runs towards the other side of the car, holds an umbrella, and opens the door. A man of the same age comes out of the vehicle, and the two both walk into the house. When they get to the entrance, the man holding the umbrella rushes forward to open the door for the other man. The house's interior is Andrew's childhood home. And as the two men enter the house, Andrew's dad comes into view. Andrew is the man who the other man, Nick, was holding an umbrella over. Behind them, another man about the same age as Andrew and Nick, Mason, rushes in from the pouring rain. He is the chauffeur who drove Andrew over. He was soaking wet as he stood in the entrance, not quite in the house, nor outside in the rain either. Andrew stands in front of his father, and they stare at each other. Unsaid things and shared memories whisper between them. The rain continues to pour down on the roof in heavy droplets. The sounds of their platters, the only sound that can be heard above the heads as Andrew and his father stand facing each other. Andrew breaks the silence. "Hello, Dad," he says, his voice thick with emotion. His dad's eyes shone with unshed tears. Just then, Another man rushes in the rain, soaking wet. He stands on the threshold and tries to shake the water away from his hair, even as he tries to protect the papers he had in his right hand from falling. He rushes into the living room where Andrew and his dad are. He awkwardly fumbles to the right as he stands beside Andrew. Andrew barely glances at him as he walks towards his father. They hug tightly, then they let go and sit on opposite chairs, facing each other. "So how are you?" "Work. I feel it's been forever since I saw you last." Andrew's dad said. Andrew chuckles and replies, "Yeah, I've missed you too, Dad. Work has been hectic and starting your own company is difficult, but I've been doing okay. And since it seems to be getting on its feet, I needed to see you. And so here I am." His dad nods his head slowly, smiling. "Well, I'm glad you did. It sometimes gets lonely around here, you know, and having my only son come visit me, well, this is easily the highlight of my week," Dad said. They both laugh. "And your diabetes? Do you have any episodes?" Andrew's dad asked, throwing one question after another, concern palpable in his voice. Andrew laughed softly and replied, "Relax, Dad. One at a time, please. Yes, I am taking my medication regularly. I am doing good on that front." Andrew paused, and his expression got serious as he continues. "I know what we went through with my diabetes, and wouldn't be so irresponsible to let that happen again. I have become even more careful, I promise. My medicine is here with me. It's with one of them." He tips his head towards the entrance where Chris stands. His dad's eyes follow Andrew's gestures. "Yes, I was going to ask, who are they? Should I offer them some tea?" Andrew smiled and replied, "Remember that story you told me about the crow and the eagle? How the crow would always pick on the eagle and fly away?" "Well," Andrew paused for dramatic effect as he points to Chris, Nick, and Mason. "These are the crows, Dad. Meet Chris, Nick, and Mason. The crows who flew away that day. The bullies who made my life a living hell in Carmen High." He stopped and looked straight into his dad's eyes, his voice firm with no trace of the tired little Andrew, who was constantly getting bullied. His eyes clear as he maintained eye contact. "I became the eagle, Dad. I became the eagle, and I soared high, higher than the crows could ever fly, and they fell." He continued, "That day, Dad, when I came home and you told me the story about the crow and the eagle, you gave me the courage to move on when I wanted to give up. And I am most glad I took your advice, because I wouldn't be here if I didn't. Thank you, Dad." I was always different than the other girls. For one thing, I was dimmed less pretty than the other girls in my school, and they always thought I was more boyish than the rest of them. Another thing, maybe the most important thing, was that I could see light when I got angry and burn everything in my path. Funny how I always seemed to do that, both literally and figuratively. Standing in front of my classmates yet again, I was listening to their taunts. I felt myself heat up. This happened every time I was angry. "She's so different from the rest. She's rather ugly, isn't she? I don't think any boy would go for a girl like that. Don't make her angry, or she'll come undone. You know they call her Dragon Girl." They started laughing at this statement. Sometimes I wonder if they thought I didn't have feelings just because I had special abilities. I felt the anger coursing through me as they kept speaking and making taunts in my direction. One of the girls pushed me and I fell back, hitting me behind on the floor. I couldn't take it anymore. I got up and yelled back at them. I couldn't stop myself, and I realized it before it was too late. I had consumed everything in my path. "There was a lot of damage done, Mr. Kelly," I heard an officer say to someone standing beside me. I was covered with a towel as the siren sounded and the firefighters filled surroundings around me. I heard my father grunt beside me, shaking his head in shame. His daughter had done it again, bringing dishonor to the family. He and my mother had always tried to change me, to make me a better person, but it never turned out the way they wanted it to. And who could blame them? I was the one that couldn't control my powers, not them. "We're so sorry for the damage," I heard him say to the fireman beside him. "Rest assured, we will pay for everything. and a generous donation will go to the school. Help everyone recover." He said the last bit quietly, and I knew what he meant. It was a bribe to keep their mouths shut. He didn't want anyone to find out about this. It would be bad for my father. He was one of the most prestigious businessmen in town. This wouldn't be good publicity for him. He shook hands with the man while I kept my head down, afraid to look into his disappointed face, because I knew he wore that expression as he spoke. "It's time to go home," he said stiffly, placing a hand on my shoulder to direct me towards his car, parked not far away from the school's grounds. "Your mother will be so disappointed, Grace." I winced. Using my middle name was always a way of communicating the disdain my parents sometimes felt for me. It always made me shiver. It meant things had gone terribly. I walked towards the passenger side of the car. I could feel the eyes looking at me intently. It was always unnerving because it never helped that I had crippling anxiety. I got into the car as quickly as possible, staring out of the window beside me. Luckily, the car was parked across the street from the school, and I didn't have to look at the school from my side of the vehicle. My dad got in and started the ignition, and his large form slumped down a bit when the car began to move away from the school. I knew he would say something soon, so I had to brace myself for it, but there was only silence, at least for a while. When we had gotten reasonably far from the school, he cleared his throat and slowed the sedan into the traffic in front of us. "You know we always try our best to help you, but," he said with a defeated sigh as he turned to look at my face. I tried to turn away, but my father always felt some way about looking away from him when he spoke. I didn't have a choice but to look at him. "But it's hard to take care of someone like you." He looked away, focusing on the road before him. I, on the other hand, turned to face the window again. I felt tears leak from my face furiously. It would always be like this. I would always be a freak. I was going to be someone like you to everyone around me. I didn't ask for these abilities. Sometimes I wish they would go away. But like everything that happens just before you go to bed, it's real and stays. You only get that moment you're sleeping to wish it away. But as soon as your eyes open, you'll be faced with the cruel truth. This was my cruel truth. "I'm sorry," I whispered as I cried silently, hoping he didn't notice I was crying. I was probably unaware that we had already gotten home, but I realized it quickly once the car door swung open and I came face to face with my mother. She stood, tall and proud, just like her husband. I always felt a stark contrast between her and me when I stood beside her. She was elegant, a sophisticated woman that everyone looked up to, and I, on the other hand, was rough and always getting into trouble. I wasn't elegant. Hovering over me with my father next to her, my mother seized me up and shook her head furiously. "How many times would this happen?" she boomed, her voice holding the anger I had just let go of a couple of hours ago. Funny, that always seemed to be the only thing we had in common. "It's not my fault, Mom," I said. "They were teasing me." What have I said about that? I let out a sigh and repeated the words she had constantly drummed into my ears. I should always report to a teacher around me. "And did you do that?" she asked. I already knew where this was heading. "They don't understand, Mom," I said, a little bit irritated. "No one does." "Well, you have to stop acting like a brat, and then maybe someone will pay you to heed." "You're an awful person," found myself saying. My feet seemed to work on their own too. I found myself running out of the yard and into the streets beyond. My parents' cries for me to come back were lost in the sea of thoughts swimming in my head. I walked a long distance, taking a detour into the park, far from home, when I felt the need to stop and finally let it all out. I screamed as loud as I could into the empty park and finally cried, the tears falling nonstop. The sky seemed to call with me. There was a rumble and then a sudden downpour, sending me running for shelter under one of the oak trees. I huddled up, crying my eyes out. Why me? Why are all these things happening to me? I felt a presence next to me and quickly lifted my head. Well, 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 if it isn't Miss Dragon Girl. A girl taunted me as she walked towards me. It was one of the teasers from my school that my blast hadn't injured. She came forward and a group of girls followed after. I don't want any trouble, I quivered, backing further into the tree. I didn't want to start anything with these girls. "We know," she replied. "Get her, girls." It happened at once, and before I knew it, the girls were all over me. They were kicking and hitting me as I lay immobile on the ground. I felt the anger in me rise, and my body began to heat up. As the beatings became more intense, then I realized I couldn't attack. This is what my mother had yelled about, what my parents had been talking about. There was no teacher to report to, but I had to stay in check. So I laid quietly, the pain increasing with each blow I was given. The girls began to laugh, and their leader said, "That's enough for today. She'll think twice about showing her ugly face around here ever again." The rain came down twice as hard as I laid bloody on the ground, the water washing over me. I kept thinking maybe this was it. I'd go into the light and never be bothered again, or perhaps they'd have to bother again. I felt a presence next to me. I didn't bother to look this time. I was sure it was one of the girls, back to do their dirty bidding. "Why are you on the floor?" a male voice called out. "Are you crying, or is it just the rain?" I didn't know who it was, but I didn't want anyone to see me in this state as I cried miserably. "Please leave me alone. They've already done their part," I yelled, but he chuckled. "You need a helping hand." He put his hand on mine, and I realized they were so warm. It was almost as if he had pulled them out of an oven. I looked up at his face and gasped. You're a dragon," I exclaimed. He laughed again, lifting me off the ground. He put his hands on my wounds, and I began to feel the pain go away. "You're a smart one, aren't you?" he said over the loud sounds of water hitting the ground. "Let's get you somewhere dry." In an instant, the rain stopped. I looked around us, and it was still raining, but it wasn't coming anywhere near us. It just fell around us. I marveled at this, forgetting the incidents that had just occurred. I had never seen magic up this close. "I've been watching you," he said. "You're special." "I'm not. I'm a freak," I replied, turning away from him to face the park around me. My eyes were still focused on the rain. "You're not a freak, if that's what you're trying to tell me." "I am," I said, a little bit annoyed, as I began to heat up again. I hated that no one could understand me. I didn't realize it, but I was releasing smoke, and I let out a little roar, and fire erupted from my hands. "See? This is what I'm talking about," I yelled, the fire growing in my hands. "I'm a freak. I'm the dragon girl who can't keep herself in check." He stared at me for a while, contemplating something, then walked towards me, placing a hand on my shoulders. "Maybe you're different and can't keep yourself in check, but you're not a freak, Grace. You need somebody that understands you." He turned towards the sky and let out a roar, fire flowing out of his mouth into the clouds above. "Come on, you give it a try," he urged. "You've got marvelous fire techniques." I let out a little awkward laugh. No one had ever said that to me before. I let out a roar and fire erupted. He continued to laugh as he rose to the air. I knew what was happening. He was transforming into a full dragon. I looked away. You weren't supposed to look at them when they transformed. After a bright light flashed, I knew he had changed. "You're not so different, you know," he said again. "I'm always here." "They hate me. I can see it in their eyes. They hate me, all of them," she whispered. "Who hates you?" He was getting impatient with her repeating the same verse repeatedly. "Everyone does. They all hate me, despite everything I do. They don't like me. Why can't anyone like me? Why can't they see my strengths?" The conversation he had earlier with a lady was replaying in his mind as he tried to calm down under the harmony of the relaxing music. He came to this concert to relieve himself a bit from the daily burden of his job, but he could not get rid of his exchange with one of his patients. "You said you tried everything. What did you do?" he asked her. She took a moment to reply and said, "Nothing. I can't do anything. Sometimes I am too weak. And it seems like I don't have the physical strength. And sometimes I don't feel myself, as if they tricked me. Or even worse, they hid me somewhere, from where I cannot return, no matter how hard I try." She was speaking in a trance and was annoying the hell out of her psychologist. He loved his job, but he hated weak women, and she was weak, at least according to him. "I don't feel an ounce of happiness inside me." Her lips quivered as she continued, "as if I have no right to be happy anymore." "Maybe you need to try to be braver. Try a bit harder to feel the emotion," he replied. "I am brave, and I am trying. But sometimes only trying isn't enough, is it?" She wasn't looking into his eyes. "Yeah, I can see that," he thought as the pencil in his hand was on the verge of splitting into two. Rolling the same pencil between his fingers, he sat down in the front row. There was an expensive-looking fancy piano at the bottom of the stage. Its pristine curved hardwood was shining under the bright chandelier. This masterpiece was indeed the center of attention of the whole theater, until someone else took its place, until she came into view. The charm of the majestic instrument began to fade as she approached the grand piano. Dressed in a knee-length white frock with her hair pinned on the top in a bun, she looked like an angel descending directly from the heavens. She ran a delicate finger across the curved body of hardwood, as if it were rare and vulnerable. He knew that this piano's heart was made from the same red spruce trees used for crafting Stradivari's violin. Yet it looked less valuable in front of the lady who was about to play it. "Am I annoying you?" she asked, somehow noticed his lack of interest in her conversation, and asked. "No, you're not annoying me," he deliberately lied. "Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I was making you bored with my non-stop chanting." She showed her concern. "No, you're not." He suppressed a yawn. "You are just making me angry with your weakness. Why can't you take a stand for yourself? You are not a child anymore." He could only think of that. Eden Smith was a successful psychologist who lived and practiced in Los Angeles for the past 20 years. Shayla was his patient who was going through a rough time. She annoyed him with her hopelessness. At first, he made a tremendous effort to cope with the irritation, but all in vain. Then his fury became visible in his expressions. It wasn't normal for him to loathe his patients, but he couldn't help himself in her case. According to him, Shayla was a typical fragile woman. They were not only nervous, weak, dependent, and less adapted to life, but it was also her fault. Because she had been going through hard times for the past 40 years, the psychologist believed that her weak character caused her failures in her personal life, and it was in her hand to switch these feelings. All the sessions he had with her left him more exhausted than ever, so he decided to alleviate his nerves by attending a concert. But he wasn't prepared for what life was about to unfold for him. The artist standing beside the piano turned and faced the audience. Eden felt astonished as he realized that the face he had been trying to get rid of all evening was standing in the middle of the stage. Shayla stood there, surrounded by spotlights, looking perfect in her attire. Yet she seemed feeble, or it was his imagination. She took her position behind the keys and closed her eyes as her fingers touched the cold surface. Inhaling a deep breath, she fingered through the slow-building start of Hate by Lucas King. As the composition changed, the tempo grew into a heavier and more aggressive tone. Every muscle in her body was engrossed in it. Her hips swayed, her head rocked, and her fingers did wonders on the keys. It looked like she was possessed by acoustics. He was amazed. Seeing her consumed in her music and generating a song with this perfection shocked him. He listened in fascination as beautiful music flowed from under the fluttering hands of this lady. The delightful lady he failed to judge. The majestic composition propelled her to the top note as she banged her hands along the keys. She was wrestling with the piano and testing its limit, and somehow she was pushing her limits too. Her face was mournful, her lips were compressed together, and her lush hair pinned high gave some loose strands to cover her face. She was stunning when she played the beautiful music. "I have been through a lot. I think I will never reach where I want to go." She started with confusion. Where do you want to go? Failing miserably at hiding his irritation, Eden asked her. I don't know. This is the actual problem, that I don't know. Shayla shrugged her shoulders. Then who knows, if not you? He asked politely. Don't know. There are a lot of places I want to visit, a lot of things, titles, awards I want to get, but I don't have the strength to walk a step towards them. The things she said earlier in the sessions made sense. He understood her better while sitting in front of the piano, rather than in his office. Her music displayed her doubts, hopelessness, and misconceptions altogether. Do you think I will ever get what I want? She asked with the hope of hearing yes in reply. He saw this hope in her eyes. Do you think I will achieve what I crave? Eden nodded his head in disagreement and said, No, certainly not with this attitude of yours. It is a big no. You will never be able to achieve your goals. You will never see an ounce of happiness with this attitude. He burst her bubble of hope and brought her out of her daydreaming. She remained silent for a whole minute. I kept looking at the floor. The dirt on the mat was making fun of her. And then she whispered, That was rude. Shayla nodded her head. That was rude of you to say this. I said what I saw, he defended his hate. Then you saw it wrong. I'm a little misguided now, but I know I will reach there, or I will never reach there. She was indeed trying to reach somewhere. It was evident by her restlessness. However, it was uncertain from her expression if she had reached her destination or not. She was not misguided as she claimed to be. Instead, she was not guided at all. And Eden felt ashamed of himself for not providing her with anything helpful. He scratched a finger down his whiskered throat and yanked on the collar behind his tie so he could breathe easily. He saw her as a weak woman who was depressed, unbalanced, and an infantile woman. He kept blaming her childishness, and non-seriousness for her discomfort. But he did not spend a moment understanding her essence. Eden was repenting that despite the troubles in her life, he never appreciated her strong personality. He never told her that everything would turn out to be okay. His misconception blindfolded him. He forgot that outside of his office, there is a life that this weak, thin woman somehow copes with and has been living for more than 40 years. He never thought she could give such a brilliant performance that would leave hundreds of people in complete awe. Sitting in a concert, he realized a life lesson that nobody knows anymore. Either they evaluate only what they want to see, or what is available for them to consume. He learned that in our life, we do not always look attractive, successful, or confident all the time. We possess different powers and abilities that others cannot see. People only look a little bit in the crack of their life and jump to conclusions. They get blindfolded by their rush and then repent later. And he didn't think about who she was in this life. Then the thought of getting to know her better crossed his mind and left him baffled. He didn't realize that love had happened to him. And not just any love, the kind that the French call sunstroke. It happens unexpectedly and leaves you with nothing but a burn. He suddenly felt a surge of happiness seeping inside of him at the thought, but it soon transformed into discontentment as he remembered the last words of Shayla. You never really tried to understand me, right? She asked him while looking into his eyes for the first time. What made you think that? Eden went into defensive mode and countered her with a question. You never asked me why I felt such things. I don't remember you showing interest in any of my hobbies. Not that I have many, but you should have at least inquired about them. She rested her back against the comforter and kept asking him questions he had no answers to. You said I would never reach there. Maybe you are right or maybe you are wrong. But the way you said that wasn't ethical at all. She accused him of non-professionalism, to which Eden had no answers. He knew she was right, but he didn't let his conscience take over his pride. You are wrong, he argued in a meek tone. We both know who is wrong, Mr. Smith. Thank you for your time. I will not say it was a nice meeting with you, because it wasn't, and she left. Eden replayed her last sentences repeatedly in his mind and saw her fingers easing down the keys. She was reaching the end of her music. The audience was getting ready to stand in their seats to appreciate her. They were about to stand for the woman he labeled weak and found irritating. He realized that people hold the power to reveal what they want you to see and hiding what they don't feel like sharing. They may be confused or weak at one thing and at the same time be a master of the other. He failed himself when he judged a book by its cover. He should have asked her about things that made her strong. He should have asked her what she does outside of her room. Where does she want to go? What does she want to achieve? It was the only way to know her better. It was the only way of soothing the burning sensation in his heart. And this is how fate played him. This is how karma worked. He fell in love with the woman he should have helped. Applying the standard sentence, born from a humble background, is an understatement in the case of Toby, as he grew up from the specks of dirt in the gutter. The latter sentence describes better the kind of rough childhood he had. Toby, unlike other kids, wore the adulthood mantle at his tender age, as he was more empathetic and intelligent than brilliant. Although his parents were stinking poor, many times he had to skip classes to survive as he engaged in a loud number of menial jobs. Often, these job sessions clashed with school hours, leaving him no choice but to skip school activities, since the school wasn't paying him, but rather taking from the little he was making, as there was always a new book or reading materials to buy. Toby is the first male and the third child with 2 younger siblings who are boys. In other words, he is the third among 5 children of his parents and the first son. Do you know what this formation implies? He has to commit more as the first son because he has a great responsibility on his shoulders. He might have decided to care less since he was just a teenager. Still, due to Toby's personality, he sees himself as more than his age, as he believes his position in his family makes him the second man after his father. Hence, he's saddled with the duty of providing for their basic needs, just like his father. He feels terrible when his elder sisters and younger brothers, who are always impatient, lament their parents' financial incapability and instability. He was the only one amongst them who understood the parents and believed that all fingers, although rooted in a particular hand, are not equal. The other siblings blame their parents at every opportunity they get for not being rich and financially committed like their mates. On several occasions, they had compared their father with the neighbor in the next house, Mr. Tadden, a business owner with his firm, and was assured to be living just as fine as he had a fleet of luxurious cars in his compound. It is wrong to play the compare and contrast game on Daddy. He's not lazy, and he's trying his best, was Toby's frequent defense line, but they often attacked his statement by uniformly echoing, his trying is never enough. The humiliation of his father from the children, Toby's siblings, and several other reasons, coupled together, made Toby engage in petty jobs that made him pay wages, and the majority of his earnings he spends on his siblings, which went on for years. Toby's love for tech and programming made him decide to learn the skill professionally, immediately after high school. He had gathered some funds to sign up. He was prepared. He saved up for 4 years from his street jobs and often kept the money in a secret hole known to him only. This weird method was applied after he was taught an unforgettable lesson. Do you care to know what happens before the hole saving procedure? Formerly, he used to keep his money carelessly. Maybe it was not careless, but keeping his money in a purse hanging around somewhere in his room was a bad idea in a house where his devouring siblings were living too. They often take his money, and no one ever takes responsibility for the theft. He decided to change his bank and started keeping his money in the ceiling. The outcome wasn't successful too, because this time, the money wasn't stolen, but eaten by rats. These previous experiences made him dig a secret hole, which turned out productive, as his hungry siblings never found out about the spot, and even the rats couldn't prevail. He overcame his adversaries. Toby later married Maria. They had 3 kids together and were all boys. He was living a mediocre life, but that's not what he envisioned. He wanted more from life as he didn't want to endure his father's humiliation. On a fateful day, he concluded to move to the city in search of greener pastures, having convinced his wife that for them to live the lives they dream about and to give their kids the best care, He had to go to the city to further his programming learning. The wife, naturally, disagreed, but since it was for a better life, she couldn't insist further. Toby promised to visit home at least once a month to see the wife and the kids, as they were still very young. The eldest was just 5 years old, the other 3, while the youngest was around a year senior. The city was in a different state entirely, but Toby kept to his words and visited just as they had agreed. He needed to raise some capital to build his own company when he was done learning. He had to work extra hours in the city. At some point, he became a freelancer for top-notch companies, earning well. He was able to raise something tangible. He developed and launched his first software. Things began to change positively, as he demanded the relocation of his wife and kids. After a few years, his company has kept a sound track and record. It topped as the best programming company in the city, attracting wealthy angel investors. This made Toby's company well known, with several branches across the country. In no time, Toby had become very wealthy and lived the life he had wished for with his wife. He overcame his greatest fear as he gave his children all the care and attention he didn't enjoy as a kid. He sent them to the best school in the city, paid their allowances before due time, and practically did everything a father was supposed to do for his kids. When it was time for them to start working, he established them in their individual choices of a business. He eventually became a billionaire after his company expanded to the entire continent and broke out of it. He now has a company in 53 countries. Toby became a well-respected man in his country, and his biographies were taught in schools to motivate kids that there is no limit to what they can achieve, irrespective of where they are coming from, as Toby is a living testimony. Even though Toby is successful in his niche, he never forced his business on any kids. He didn't impose his choice on them, but instead respected their decisions and gave them his full support. After about 30 years of recognition, Toby's boys had grown up and had established themselves with financial and psychological support from their father. The eldest son was an auto dealer, the second son was into real estate, and the youngest ran a successful restaurant. Everything was smooth until the unexpected happened. Toby was diagnosed with cancer and discovered he had just a few months to live. He felt terrible for himself, but worried more about his legacy when he was gone, his company. He has not had time to checkmate the boys as they grew up in wealth. Reminiscing on his memories as a lad, he concluded that his father's humiliation was purposefully because he was poor. The thought torments him by the day, and each time he thinks, a question pops up in his head. If his sons were born as poor, would they still regard and respect him, or humiliate him as his siblings did to his father? He decided to test the kids before he died. He didn't tell them about his newly discovered health situation, not even his wife. He decided to run a setback test on the boys to know if they would still love him regardless. He openly declared his company was going bankrupt due to some money he had borrowed to boost his company some years back, of which the interest had grown massively beyond his ability, so that he would be losing the company to debt. He explained to his sons that he had also mortgaged his house and was to lose his homes too. He told them he had to sell his cars to cover the remaining debt. Hence, he had no property or possessions left. He carried his board members along that all was a stunt, and he was doing it to get some fundamental rights. But they should cooperate with him and keep the truth away from the public. When it's time to unwrap the truth, he would do just that. It was challenging to convince the investors, as they complained that such a prank was deadly and would affect their heritage. But afterwards, they agreed to cooperate as long as he promised them that the stunt wouldn't last too long. His sons didn't believe in hearing it at press stations until they confronted their father and he confirmed it as accurate. They were disappointed their father didn't tell them about it, and they had to find out most embarrassingly. They left their father in anger. After a week, Toby went viral as people had different things to say about the shocking news. Some emphasized with him for his massive loss, while others abused him for taking such a stupid step, as they thought he was an intelligent businessman. He sooner appeared in his sons' respective companies, starting with the eldest, to know what they still felt about him, to see if they were worthy of managing his wealth when he eventually died. He appeared like a retard searching for a job in their distinct companies, as he claimed he was now homeless. They sent him away, as they claimed he didn't involve them when he got the exorbitant loan, and rarely included him in his business when it was ranking. Thus, he shouldn't bother them, as, unlike him, they are still respectable people. The youngest son, however, was disappointed that his father didn't include them earlier until he lost all, forgave him, and listened to him. He offered him a soothing job for an older man, and if he needed to learn a new skill, he would pay for the course and grant him the capital to start over once he was done learning. He will also provide him with a new house and car to drive around. He ordered that his staff serve him honorably daily and offer him whatever he asked for. He later took him home to freshen him up and change his clothes, as he looked so unkempt and rough. On the second day, Toby summoned his 3 sons for a family meeting. The eldest and second son refused to attend, as they were still cross at him. They claimed to be busy, but they gave a second thought to hearing the venue. The meeting was held in Toby's private guest house, his most luxurious house. The sons were surprised because that was one of the houses he claimed to have lost. Toby started by revealing his newly detected ailment. Then he told them he didn't lose any of his property, as he had only put them on a test to know whom amongst them genuinely cares about him and is capable of preserving his legacy when he's gone. Still, only their little brother had proven to be the qualified one by passing his little test. For that reason, even though he has forgiven the other 2, as they will remain his sons, 80% of his property shall be willed to their little brother, including his great company. In comparison, the brothers will share the remaining 20%. The brothers sobbed bitterly and asked for their father's forgiveness. After 2 weeks, Toby passed away, and his lawyer to his sons allocated his property as he demanded. The moral lesson of this story is that there's no limit to what you can attain and where you can reach, regardless of your past account or background. However, while money is good, we shouldn't love people just for their money, no matter who they are to us. A relationship is unhealthy if it's based just on money. Similarly, respect shouldn't be quantified by how much wealth someone amasses or possesses. Furthermore, it's not ideal for forsaking a friend or family during troubles or setbacks. No condition is permanent, they say, good or bad, because life is full of ups and downs. When a family or friend falls, it's our utmost responsibility to be the shoulder they can lean on by helping in whatever way we can. In some situations, money might not be the solution. They could all need words of encouragement or physical presence to get back on their feet. So when someone falls, don't make fun of their situation or detach. Instead, help them rise again. That's what a family or friend should be about. Conclusively, getting crossed at someone for not doing the needful at the right time is okay. Like in the case of Toby, he didn't carry his family along on time. But then your anger shouldn't overshadow the bond and relationship you have built with someone over the years. Learn to forgive soon, just like the youngest child did. Don't hold up to someone's flaws for long, as no man is perfect. Be the reason why someone who is sad smiles again. Be the reason why someone who has fallen rises again. Be more of a strength than a weakness.